Good evening and welcome. It's great to have you with us. This is a new season and a special evening, and I'm very grateful to those who work on the York Minster Park Speaker Series Committee, which is chaired by Alan Williams, who will come in a few moments and give an update and a few announcements, and Joan, who welcomed you at the door, Catherine Londy, and Dr. Eric McGeer are all members of this committee. I'm very grateful to them for the work they do. We all are. And we also want to welcome members of the Canadian Institute for Historical Education, who do great work and who co-sponsor some of our series with us. So welcome to those who are here from that organization as well. And this is the York Minster Park Speaker Series. It's designed to really sort of an opportunity to engage with the community in subjects of mutual interest and learning together as a continuing education event. And so we're really delighted to have all of you with us. We also welcome those who are with us and watching online, and we know that often there are many. This is a particularly large crowd tonight, so I just want you to know how you're the draw. And it also helps that the Blue Jays aren't on TV tonight. But I'm Peter Holmes, and I should have said that. I'm the minister of the church, and it's just a privilege to welcome all of you here. Alan is going to come with some announcements and introduce our speakers, so thank you. And welcome Charlotte and Maureen. It's just great to have both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome. Thank you all for coming tonight, and as Peter said, thank you also to those of you who are watching online. I just heard from David downstairs that we've got over 150 people watching online as well. So, and thank you to my friend Peter, who's helping back in the corner here. We've got a great program tonight. We're very excited to have Charlotte Gray and Maureen Jennings, two of Canada's best-selling authors, one in the fictional realm and one in the non-fiction realm. So I do have a few announcements first, though. The first thing is that tonight's presentation, as Peter said, is co-sponsored by the Canadian Institute for Historical Education. So I'd like to open by saying the sort of mission statement of the two groups in this case. The Speaker Series purpose is to offer continuing education lectures by outstanding speakers on topics of general interest. And the CIHE's mission statement is promoting historical literacy through research, education, and engagement in the public square. And we do have, as Peter mentioned, people here from the board of, or from the CIHE, including several from the board. We have Graham Scott and Sean Conway, at least, from the board. And we'll be hearing from Sean at the end of the night, as he will be thanking our speakers. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the upcoming events in both series. Our next event in the Speaker Series, we're happy to welcome back for the third time Adam Schultz, another of Canada's best-selling authors, and he has a new book coming out October 7th. And the Toronto launch of that book is here in this room on October 10th. So it's Vanished Beyond the Map, The Mystery of Lost Explorer Hubert Darrell. And then on Friday, November 9th, we have Ted Barris, another popular historian and well-known name, on his latest book, which is The Battle of Britain, Canadian Airmen in Their Finest Hour. And then the CIHE also has several upcoming events. On October 28th, we'll welcome James Stewart and his book, The Prime Ministers, which officially isn't published until September 30th, but in fact it was in the bookstores last week. So this is a very early copy, and I had a chance to read it a few weeks ago, and it's a great book, so I recommend that event to you as well. And then at the end of November, we have Stephen Bone, and he's the author of two well, more than two, but he's best known for two books called Company, which is about the Hudson's Bay Company, and Dominion, which is about the building of the CPR. And that's an excellent book. I think that's his most recent one. And he's going to be in conversation with Christopher Dummett about, as you can read, the question of manifest destiny, how the HBC and the CPR and Sir John A. helped to build a Canadian nation against the odds. And it's, as you can guess, it's about the idea of American designs on the Canadian landscape. And it's a very relevant subject even today in 2025. So, and finally, in January, we have John Ibbotson. Or not finally, but the next in the last one I'll tell you about. And his latest book is called The Duel, Diefenbaker, Pearson, and the Making of Modern Canada. And he's going to be talking about that in January. So both organizations have websites where you can read more about the upcoming events. You can also watch these events online, to those of you who are doing that now or are not able to be here in person for some of the upcoming ones. The other thing you can do there is make a donation. So I can say that both groups rely on your donations to put on the programming that they do, and so they would be appreciative of the donations. We do ask for a small donation at the door, but that only partially covers the costs of the events. So now, before I introduce our speakers, I have one other item of business. We have I should say that there are copies of both Maureen's and Charlotte's books available at the back, and you can do that after the presentation, and both have said they would be happy to sign the books. But I have a copy of Maureen's book, Accept the Dying, which I believe was the first in the Murdoch Mysteries series, which I would we're going to give away. So if you look on the flyer on your chair from the CIHE, there's a number on the back. And yeah, it's the one from the CIHE, not the one from the speaker series. So I'm going to ask Maureen to draw a number, and that lucky person will receive a copy of Accept the Dying.
And the lucky person is number 88. Whoa!
Okay, and now I'm going to ask Charlotte to draw for a copy of The Massey Murder, which I can say that this, I read this book and I really enjoyed it. It's a marvelous book, and there are still 6 or 8 copies at the back. It's in the mass market version, so it's only $10. So I encourage you to, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do that. And I'll ask Charlotte to make the draw.
And the lucky person is 99. We have a winner.
There you go.
That was fun. Can we keep doing it?
All right, so now I will just say a few words about our speakers. They have they've worked out how they're going to do a presentation. They'll speak for about an hour, and then we'll have a chance for some questions from the audience, and it should be good. So, Maureen Jennings, both of our guests are from the UK and came to Canada in their adulthood. Maureen is the author of 4 detective series, 3 of which are set in Canada and 1 of which is in the UK. And the most famous one, of course, is Murdoch Mysteries series, which has become a popular television series that is now shown in 175 countries or territories around the world. So we're very happy to have you with us tonight, Maureen. And Charlotte Gray is perhaps Canada's best-selling popular historian. And what that means is not an academic historian, but telling Canada's stories in a way that is accessible to ordinary Canadians, and she does a marvelous job of that. Massey Murder is perhaps the most famous, I don't know, but her most recent book is called
Powerful Mothers.
Powerful Mothers.
Sorry, Passionate Mothers.
Passionate
Powerful
Mothers,
Sons.
Powerful Sons. There we go. And it's about Churchill and Roosevelt's mothers, and has gotten wonderful reviews. I have to say I haven't read it yet, but and Joan says it's a fantastic book. Thank you, Joan. So, and also about almost a dozen books, others than those two, biographies of Nellie McClung and Alexander Graham Bell, and of Sir Harry Oakes, or the murder of Sir Harry Oakes. So, we have a treat in store for us tonight, as these two ladies will have a conversation about writing history, a conversation between two storytellers. So, over to you.
Okay. Charlotte and I have a carefully rehearsed, completely spontaneous presentation. And I'm just going to take the lead, and then we're going to switch, and she'll take the lead. But we are just going to talk and share experiences, and then I know that Charlotte likes this as well. We hope that obviously you'll do the same with that when we've finished. But I did write down some questions. All right, Charlotte, what drew you to history in the first place?
I think that something that, of course, we have in common is that we both grew up in a country where we were, without even realizing it, saturated in history. We grew up in a country where every landscape was pockmarked with the signs of human habitation. We grew up in a country which valued its history. We both, I think we discussed this, started with the Ladybird books. Anybody born in Britain will remember the Ladybird books, which were dear little books, which you could read from the ages of about 6 until you hit university, frankly. And each had just a sort of wonderful glimpse of part of the British creation myth, whether it was King Alfred burning the cakes, or the Norman conquest and King Harold losing an eye, or whether it was Elizabeth I sending off her armada. And we grew up in a country where history was valued and was such an important part of our education and our sense of why, and I'm afraid this actually marks us as the generation we are, why Britain was actually the most important country in the world. I'm not sure how many British people believe that any longer. I hope none of them. But it was something that was deeply embedded in us. So history, Maureen, I think you'd agree, history was always a sort of part of our education and part of our assumptions that we never even thought about. And we were also surrounded by marvelous buildings. So, Maureen, what's your take on this?
Well, when we talked earlier, we didn't know this beforehand, but we both lived fairly near a castle. No, Mike? Sorry? Is that a problem? No? Okay. And Charlotte's going to tell a wonderful story about Warwick Castle, but just as an example of what you're saying, because where I grew up in Birmingham, which isn't far, and as children we would play in the castle. And you can't imagine doing anything like that now, but I remember it very vividly, and I even remember a very dark, it wasn't exactly a tunnel, but it was a priest hole. And of course you didn't really know what that was, but I remember it being very dark and frightening. But we'd play there until, I don't know when that ever stopped. But that was the sense that what had happened then was just part of your life. It wasn't separate. You didn't have to pay to get in. You just did it. And you have a wonderful
I had the same, we discovered Warwick Castle had played a huge role in both our childhoods. For you it was living near it and playing within these medieval walls. For me it was that I come from Sheffield, I come from Yorkshire, which is a county that's always had a strong sense of itself and has been relatively anti-establishment. And I was being driven down to the south of England, where I had a lot of my education. And we stopped at Warwick Castle. And my mother took me around, and the docent showed us a portrait. And it was a portrait of Oliver Cromwell, who, of course, was a leader in the British Civil War in the 17th century. And the docent said to me, this sort of eager little girl about to take an exam, and she said, "And do you know who this is?" And I said, "Yes, that is Oliver Cromwell, who was a very brave man because he took on the weight of the British aristocracy and the absolute monarch, not so absolute at that stage, I want to say for any historian in the audience, but nonetheless, who had an extraordinary amount of power, and he decided that Britain no longer needed a monarchy, and he led a civil war and a revolution." And the docent looked at me in absolute horror and said, "Oliver Cromwell was a very wicked man. He cut off the king's head." And this, I was 11 at the time, and this was my first glimpse that history is complicated. So for both of us, Warwick Castle actually sort of marked a stage in our lives which got our imaginations going.
Yes, and a little later when I was in grammar school, there was quite a division between the Roundheads and the Royalists that would get quite heated as to who was the best, really. Okay, so you went into nonfiction, and I went into fiction. So why did you go into nonfiction?
I think because what I always say is that nonfiction, in fact, can be just as exciting as fiction. Mm-hmm. And it also serves a more important, not more important, I would never say that, but an important role in terms of explaining the world to people. And I have to say, though, that when I first started writing my books, which are very deeply fact-based, when people said to me, "Oh, it read like a novel," I couldn't believe I was reading history. I was always very flattered, because that was the impact I wanted to have. Because, Maureen, both you and I are in the area of entertainment. I'm in public history, you're in historical novels. I mean, it's a spectrum, and I'm at the fact-based level, and you are inventing plots, but you have a lot of people that you sort of recognize, actually, if you know your history. And I have constraints on me that you don't have, but we both have to grab our readers, and we both also hope to make a living, which is not a negligible consideration. You say, why do you stay in non-history, or why am I in non-history? And it's because I began as a magazine writer, and so that was my training. And I've always been fascinated for a news magazine writer. I've always been fascinated for you, Maureen. I mean, where do you get your plots from? And do you decide what the plot is and then do the research? Or do you immerse yourself in a period and then sort of see a story coming out of it?
I think the latter, very much the latter, because I do love to read. I read very widely. I call it casting a wide net. And I certainly encourage anybody here, if you're in any way looking into creative things, we're wonderfully unique. And I taught some creative groups for a while. And I'd say to them, I called it the boing boing. And I swear, if I said to everybody in this room, go out for half an hour, don't move from the premises, come back and tell us what you saw, I swear it would be different for everybody. Because what goes boing for me, you might say, oh, really? But that's what I've learned to trust. And perhaps the same for you, because I'm reading and I'll say, wow, that's really interesting. Sometimes I come back to it later, sometimes it's right there, and that will find its way into a story. The other thing is that as a writer, I don't think you have this affliction, Charlotte, but as a writer of mysteries, you go into somewhere that's sort of, I remember going to a very beautiful place in the Hebrides, cliff, sky, birds, and I'm trying to figure out the best place to put a body. Very weird thing, but you probably don't have to do that. So definitely I let it come. I let the story come in terms of what I've been reading. Sometimes it's actual artifacts, which we're going to show in a little while. But did I answer that question? I think I did.
No, you did, except I'm also very jealous of fiction writers because they can name their characters. How do you find your names? Where does Murdoch come from?
Okay, naming your characters is extremely important, and I've never been asked this before, but I can't tell you how it is important, how much time I take. I'll come back to Murdoch in a second. What I do is I'll go to a time period and get a list of names, and I'll use the surname and the first name so that nobody sues me. I was in your book and I was a villain. No. Use friends' names. William Murdoch, the character, I took a long time on that. The Murdoch came from the fact that there was a reviewer at the time called Derek Murdoch, and he was really supporting Canadian genre, crime writing genre. He'd passed away, so I didn't think I was currying favor. So I wanted Murdoch in his honor, and William because I am completely obsessed with William Shakespeare. And again, speaking of childhood, I used to look at his portrait and I was sure we were related. I didn't have the beard, but it was... Anyway, yeah, names are really, really important, but you're stuck with that, right? You
I can't make them up.
So do you choose a character that's got a good name, or you just...
The other thing I wanted to ask you is about research.
Yes.
So, you read widely in the secondary literature and see what sort of catches your attention, but then how often do you go to the primary material? How often do you go to archives?
Originally, I went to the archives a lot, and then they moved, so it was hard to go. But I'll just tell you one example, which was, I'll never ever, two things actually. I made friends with our librarian archivist there, and I went in one day for my usual morning, and he said, I've got something special. And I don't know if you've been in the archives, but they literally wheel things on a trolley, and there are boxes, and in the boxes there are folders. So he brought them over and he said, these are all coroner's inquests. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, and he opened the box. But it was a thrill because those were from the 1800s, the real thing, and of course that's the real thing. And I'll just tell you this one story because it's an example, and I used it a year later. All of the folders are labeled with the crime. Sorry, this wasn't the coroner. These are all criminal charges. So the charge was blasphemy. I thought, okay, I'm going to see what was considered blasphemy at this time. And I took out the folder, and in it was a little Sunday school card. It was about this big, because it was the actual evidence of blasphemy was in this folder. And around the edges of the card, and I knew it would have been a young girl, a 12-year-old girl who had been charged, and around the edges she had written all these obscenities. And it really was shocking. It was absolutely shocking because there was a beautiful drawing of Jesus. So around it she had written all that she was charged, I knew that much. She was sent to reform school, I knew that much. But what intrigued me was, how did she know those words? I don't mean that in a funny way, but I swear I was in my mid-20s before I ever heard those words. But so that I thought was why would that child, misused child, do that? Who found it? And so on. So the whole background to that became a story, a book.
Actually, I had a similar experience when I was researching the Massey murder, and I knew that Carrie Davis, who'd been accused of shooting Fred Massey at point blank range, she'd been accused of murder, and she was in Don Valley Jail, and her lawyers were making every effort, obviously, to get her off the charge. And I was reading the newspaper accounts, actually, so that I was in the archives, but reading old newspapers on microfilm rather than reading court documents. And her lawyers, this is adult conversation, her lawyers had sent in 2 doctors to decide whether Carrie was a virgin. And they went into her cell at Don Valley Jail, where this 15-year-old English girl who really was almost clueless. She'd actually been sexually molested by Fred Massey and was very frightened. And the wardens let the 2 doctors in, and I knew what the bed looked like. It actually would have looked exactly like my boarding school bed, with those metal, the metal bed with a very thin mattress. And they examined her, and that's all I knew. But rather like you picture what's happening, and I thought, oh my God, how did they? And they came out and said she was a virgin. I thought, oh, I don't want to even think about the medical examination they put her through. But of course, it is part of the whole shocking story of how women were not believed at that stage, and such a gruesome test on an underage girl, which would have been pretty insanitary, I think. But you sit there in the archives thinking about this and thinking, that is an incredible story, but it's something that, in fact, we should know that kind of thing was happening. How that girl would have known, the little girl would have known those words. She would have learnt them in the street and from the rows between her parents and the hearing drunks in the street outside her home, presumably. And she probably, you wondered, did she actually know what they meant?
Yeah. Well, I think what I experienced, and perhaps a lot of you hear of it, I feel like you step through a door.
Yes.
And it can be a very simple sentence, it can be an image, and you step through the door and you feel that you are truly in that time.
Yes.
In that place. And that's why we love history, right? Because we go somewhere else. And so you use newspapers, I use newspapers a lot. Primary sources as much as possible, letters, diaries, and I don't think this was something we talked earlier, but I don't think I mentioned this, Charlotte. One of the best step-throughs into history you can ever do are how-to books. Cookbooks, for example, and I think I'll show you that in a bit. But for example, I have a wonderful book that was written in 1862 called Advice to Coroners. So you step into that one, and again you get, what did they know? What did they consider important? So those sort of teaching manuals and cookbooks I could just spend, and the street directory. The street directory sounds rather dull, but I spend hours reading the street directory. Just 1917, you get the demographic, you get everything.
You also get a lot from the handwriting. One of my complete frustrations when I was writing Passionate Mothers, Powerful Sons, which is about these 2 extraordinary mothers, Jenny Jerome Churchill, Winston Churchill's mother, and Sarah Delano, Franklin Roosevelt's mother, I was writing about these two women, both born in 1854 in New York. And I did all my book research and that I could, all the secondary sources, immersing myself in both families' histories in my study in Ottawa, where I live, and preparatory to going to the archives, which of course is what one really wants to do. We both love being in archives, as you gathered. And I was so excited, and COVID. I couldn't get to the Churchill archives in Cambridge, England. I couldn't get to the Roosevelt archives in Hyde Park, New York. I couldn't leave the country. I couldn't leave Ottawa. I could barely leave my house, and I couldn't get to the archives. Luckily, those two families were sufficiently well known that, in fact, there was a lot of secondary material, and a lot of correspondence had actually been edited and published. So I actually had the substance of most letters. But when I finally did get to those two sets of archives, the joy for me was, I knew by then Sarah Roosevelt was a very proper, very old-fashioned woman who stayed, within convention. She was a sort of 19th century mother with 18th century attitudes. I knew that Jenny Jerome Churchill was this courtesan who was extraordinarily attractive, but also charismatic and sort of indisciplined and wildly extravagant, and sort of 19th century mother in, frankly, a sort of flapper 1920s style. And I got to see their handwritings. And guess what? Sarah's were beautiful copperplate handwriting. She stayed on the lines. She signed off the letters beautifully. Sort of very a well-behaved woman's correspondence with her sons. Jenny, who became passionately interested in her son after he'd become interesting to her, which meant, when he sort of was in his late adolescence. Jenny's handwriting was wild. It was, sort of slanting, abbreviations. Every time she said, your father is going to be very cross with you, she just put an X for cross. And the letters were very short because she was always in a hurry. And I thought, I got them right, because the handwriting told the story.
Yes. It actually reminds me of, I saw a facsimile, it's obviously not the real letter, Conan Doyle's first draft of a story he wrote called The Lion's Mane. And this was a while ago when I was a bit younger, let's say. Because I'm a bit embarrassed to say this, but you remind me. So what I did, I traced his handwriting in the hope that I would commune with Arthur Conan Doyle. Which is why you get a lot of sense of that, don't you? Yeah. Okay, we talked about finds, the things that we go, wow. And you Charlotte had to come in on the train from Ottawa, so she couldn't bring a box of finds with her. But can you tell us a couple? And I have the opportunity to show.
But the great finds. Well, actually, I was thinking about, you said, why don't you bring a sort of show and tell thing from one of your sort of archival experiences? And I have to say that I don't really, I have sort of old books that I've loved. Actually, there's something completely different, which is I spent a lot of time in the Library and Archives Canada, and I know some of you have been in the reading room there, which overlooks in the original building, which they're about to move out of. Not the original building, but the current building that they're about to move out of. And you are I was reading Susanna Moody and Catherine Partrail's correspondence, and I would get it, and then I would look out of the window, and the building is by the Ottawa River, this huge river, which, if you come from England and you're used to the River Trent, or even the River Thames, those are just sort of trickles compared to Canadian rivers. And I would sort of read Catherine or Susanna talking about what winter was like in Upper Canada. And this was January, and I'd look out at this vast expanse of frozen river and hills covered in snow outside. And it was that sense of actually being in the landscape, being and sort of understanding their amazement at the country they were in, their desperate homesickness, because I I'm still occasionally plagued by that. And this sense of a landscape that can be both so beautiful and so menacing. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have sort of actual artifacts in the way that we discussed, but I just have those sort of very intense senses of connection. What were you going to show us?
Well, I was just going to say, location, it's very important to me as well. That's why I think a big reason for setting my books in Toronto, and then the one in UK I was there, was to be there. And I say that when I'm researching for a new book, I become a street walker, which sounds a bit weird, but I do walk up and down, and you can get the sense, you can get the time period, especially, it's a lot of it's gone now in Toronto, but when I was starting, a lot of it was still there, like around Allen Gardens. You look at the house, and you get the social structures, servants and children upstairs, family downstairs, and that says everything you need to know about what it was like. But I'm glad you asked me about artifacts. I have too many. I'm just going to show you 3 things. Well, 4. Okay, sorry. This is not an artifact. This is just a printout, but I absolutely love sharing this because this is a newspaper, and you Conan Doyle fans, and I know there are a lot of Sherlock was always studying the agony column of the newspapers, right? So you look at what's for sale, what's wanted, and so on. So this one says, Saint Bernard dog for sale or swap with a bicycle. I love it. Were they riding the dog? That is absolutely a true thing. Okay, let me just show you this. This is one, I always say this is my most precious book. It was published in 1916. And it's the real thing. Talking about handwriting. I know you can't see this too well at the back, but just a little bit maybe. In the front, I got the book, and I saw that in the front, the owner of the book, it turned out to be a young man, had written his name, beautiful handwriting. It turned out that he was a clerk. And he put the date, which is 15th of May, 1916. I said, oh, wow, that's great. I turned to the back of the book, and I'm sorry you can't see this. It says his name again and his address, which is right near where I live. And over here, you can't see, I know, but I knew it was shorthand. It's Pitman shorthand. And you try to find someone who could translate it now. You can. Do you want to do it? Come on. Have a go. It's very small, I'm afraid, the date of the shorthand is September 1915. Very important. Okay, see what you can do. It's tiny, that's the problem.
Actually, if you could send it to me. I don't know, try.
Yes? Tried?
Do you know what it is?
I do, yes.
Try to?
Yes?
T-O-O? Only?
Shall I say what it is? Go, you're doing great.
Okay. To.
Tried to.
He has an X there, which means the end of the sentence.
Tried to enlist.
Mm-hmm.
To.
Be able to.
To objected. My chums went overseas. Wow, thank you so much. That was really hard because it's very tiny, but I had a really hard time finding anybody who could tell me what it actually said, so that was one of them. Tried to enlist, 2 objected, my chums went overseas. I'm sure the 2 objected were his parents. I later discovered that his older brother had already died in the war, and they had the right to say, you cannot enlist. my chums went overseas. My chums went overseas. And it's talking about stepping into a world with the patriotism, the guilt, I think that he felt that he couldn't go. And then, of course, as a mystery writer, the big question, why did he write it in the book? Why did he write it in shorthand? Who would have, I don't know. So I made up a whole story about why he did. When we were in England once looking at some, talk about discovering old treasures, a friend of ours did one of those detectorist things, and he unearthed coins from the Civil War. They'd been there for 300 years. And of course someone said to me something like, nobody really knows why they were buried there. And I said, that's like giving catnip to a cat. I mean, whoa, I had a good story for that one. So anyway, thank you very much. I love showing that because it's so poignant, I thought. And I never could find out. I went to the house, but that has long changed hands. So, Charlotte, yours now. Oh, I'm taking up too much time. Let me, no, I don't want to bring my... Okay.
Well, I
Cookbooks.
One of my concerns is always, for me it's overt, and for you I think it's implicit, is that you are feeling the attraction that history has for us. You are feeling the way that we love to immerse ourselves in the past. We love to explore different periods. We love to try and bring it to life for readers. You are doing it in a way that, the genre is mystery. I'm doing it in creative nonfiction. But what we're both doing is trying to ensure that people understand the past is part of who we are. We didn't sort of spring fully fledged into the Canadian civilization, Canadian life today. I mean, I'm extremely concerned about the fact that public knowledge of general knowledge about Canadian history is sinking so fast, and that the link between sort of today's Canada and where it sprang from. Why do we have the values we have? Why do we have the buildings we have? When you walk around, do you understand what an armory is? Do you understand what a church is? Do you understand why the mosques are actually very recent? Do you understand why the road runs this way? Do you know who that statue is of? And before you pull it down, can you please just explore it a little bit more? I'm so concerned that people, so many people who are interested in our past come at it with just their current priorities. They don't see, frankly, the past is different from today. For one thing, people had bad teeth, they smelt and they died, and now we don't accept any of those things. And it's a different country, and that country is not called Downton Abbey. And so I really want people to understand the past, but on its own terms. So, on the other hand, in order to catch public attention today, you have to have a story or a theme that resonates with people. Because, just to revert to what I said earlier, Maureen and I are not in the business of public education. We're in the business of writing books that sell, so that you want audience, you want people to actually want to read them and to be entertained by them. And so one thing I wanted to raise with Maureen is how you balance those priorities. How do you balance taking people into the past, making them understand it's different, but not making them feel it's so foreign they don't need to know it? And I'm interested in your response to this. So the 19th series of Murdoch Mysteries is about to start, which is pretty impressive. And Maureen's still writing at least one in each series. In the new series, there is a Korean Canadian who is not just joins the Toronto police force, but in fact is made a very senior officer in it, over the head of our hero, William Murdoch, which in fact, you know, this is in 1919, a period of Chinese exclusion, a period of intense racism. It would never have actually happened, but it's a device by which the producers, you know, hope to keep current audiences watching. How do you feel about that?
It's a really, really tricky subject, and it would take a long, long time to elaborate because it's just very tricky. Just two examples. When I started to write the very, very first Murdoch book, that came out in 1997, I think. So I had to be very careful about the language because I'm very keen on making it believable. I really want to feel that if you're reading my book, you really believe it, that you're stepping into a world of the 1890s or up into 1936, which is the most recent one. And so I want you to believe it, and I'm very, very careful about the details. However, some of the language, for example, is so offensive to us now, I couldn't put it in there. So it's a real balancing act sometimes. So I don't want to create a book that's so much through the lens of now that it's unbelievable. It's a very tricky issue, and every situation is different. Attitudes. I was at a conference in England some time ago, and it was about writing history stuff, and I don't think it's more relevant to fiction a little bit because you can get the facts. You go and look them up. You can really do the dates and the place and so on. But somebody came up with this wonderful expression, anachronism of attitude. And I thought that was brilliant because, again, you can create a situation. It's supposed to be 1890 or earlier or whatever it is, and it's anachronistic. So it's a very tricky thing. And as I say, you don't want to be so offensive, and I don't have the answer. I just know it's tricky. But and certainly, and the TV show, the Murdoch Mysteries, it's easier, I think, to be anachronistic. And I'll tell you the gossipy things at a later date where I'm going, no. But I won't name this person. He's a beloved person. It's not Yannick. But one of the characters is very much like his character. And he won't always learn his lines. So he likes to improvise. So there was one little scene where this person says to Murdoch, "Ciao." And I go, "Ciao, please." Anyway, stuff like that. And that everybody just laughs about that. But the issue, again, like we have not dealt in the show, and I think that's okay. We have not dealt with color issues, racist issues, social issues in a way. And that's all right. That's another show, a different show if you want to seriously look at them, and some shows do. I think that's great, actually. Mm-hmm. But this, we're all pretending that you say ciao. Anyway.
Do you ever use a research assistant?
I have a wonderful research assistant, but again, I find that I find things myself. It's like going for a walk in the woods, and you know you're going to the other end, but along the way you find all kinds of things, and she can't do that for me.
I know a good friend of mine is Jane Urquhart, who writes a lot of historical novels, and we were comparing what it's like being in the archives. And I'm in the archives, and I'm reading, and I'm scribbling notes, but often I'm actually just sort of taking out what I think I need. And she's in the archives, and she's just reading. She's not taking notes, because she doesn't actually have to get things right. But what happens to me is that I wake up in the middle of the night and I think, what was important in what I just read was not what I was looking for, but it was that other thing. But which page was it on? Because I didn't make a note of it. And Jane said, oh, I never have to do that, because I will remember what catches my imagination and just build on it. I never have to go back to page 345 and get the quote exactly right.
Well, this is just a jump off a little bit, but one of the things that gets me riled up is trying to figure out the money equivalent.
Oh.
It's really tricky. What was $5 now? What could you buy for that back then? And that's hard to do. So I often go to the catalog. I have an old Eaton's catalog. So I got a wonderful thing there. A blouse might be 50 cents. That gives you a good idea. So that's sort of, my assistant often does that slightly more boring stuff for me. Okay, I have a question now, right around this, okay?
Yeah? Go ahead.
Now, I said this to Charlotte on the phone. Of all the people you have met, who did you most admire and like?
Well, I pointed out to Maureen that I hadn't met any of the people I write about because they're dead. And it's always an advantage because dead people can't sue. But and also asking, a biographer, who's your favorite subject, it really is being asked, which is your favorite child.
Yeah.
But the ones who have stayed with me longest, and partly because, it's one of my most successful books, but it was Susanna Moody and Catherine Parr Traill, these two sisters. And it was because I shared so much of them in being, they were middle-class women who'd established their reputations as writers while they were still in England. And then they'd come to Canada because of their husbands, because their husbands wanted to come. I came to Canada because I married a Canadian, and they were clueless. And I was really clueless. When I arrived, I had no idea so much about this country. I mean, I think we've talked about the fact that we thought it was going to be an extension of England, and it wasn't. But I also loved the dynamic between these two sisters, for one of whom the glass was always half empty, and for the other of whom the glass was always half full. And if you've read the book or you know those two sisters, you know which is which. But Susanna had this wonderful witty wit, really wicked wit, and she was fun to write about for that reason. And Catherine, if you were feeling really down and feeling really miserable, Catherine's the one you want to be with because she's kind-hearted. And they have stayed with me. I think they're the ones who I still feel are sisters. Of the other people I've written about, I love them all in their different ways. I could never write about a person I really didn't like, although I'm hugely admiring of people who can write about Trump or Hitler.
Ooh, notice she said Trump. I was going to ask you that, actually. As you were working on one of the books, which are always people-centric, was there anyone you kind of didn't like very much after a while? They can't sue, they're dead.
No, because it's never black and white.
Yeah.
It's never black and white. Do you write villains?
I'm sorry?
Have you ever written villains, real villains? You've written murderers, but...
That's how I get my revenge. You're going to be a villain. So, one quick story. A few years ago, we had a fabulous dog. It was a border collie called Jeremy Brett. And unfortunately, he decided to herd a boy that was going past the house. Now, border collies, anyway, he nipped the boy. So, mother, rightfully so, complained. And a few days later, 2 policemen arrived at the door to check out the dog. And it was clear what had happened, and it was not a bite. I mean, if you know the border collie crowd, it's called a grip, and they literally just nipped the sheep to move them along. But this wasn't a sheep, it was a young boy. So anyway, so the policeman came to the door, and they were fine. So my husband eyed and said, well, she's a writer, and, you know, if you like, she'll put you in her book. No, he meant this in a very sort of placating way. And I'm having a fit because I'm writing Victorian fiction, and they had to have Victorian names. Anyway, so the one younger constable looked at me and he said, am I going to be a good cop or a bad cop? so I didn't put him in the book. Anyway, but why did I get onto that? Oh, sorry. Taking revenge, right. Okay, so that's...
What's coming next for you?
Before we get to that, I just wanted to pursue this thing that I'd love to have you share with everybody. If we could time travel from everything that you've done and know, would you go any time or any place would you like to go? And where would you absolutely not want to go?
You know, life was pretty tough for women until fairly recently. My first book about Mrs. King, the mother of William Lyon Mackenzie King and the daughter of William Lyon Mackenzie. So she lived most of her life was in the sort of late 19th, early 20th century. And she was constantly socially not where she wanted to be. She was always desperately groping, trying to get into the Toronto middle class of that period. And she had this brilliant son, William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was, she hoped he would sort of be her not just her anchor, but also he would take her with him into the Canadian elite. She spent more time worrying about housework, worrying about if they entertained people, would they have the right servants, clothes, china, tablecloth. And for sort of women in that period, the domestic concerns were so huge, stuff that we don't even need to think about now. And any period, I think, where women didn't have the option of earning their own living, I'd have been pretty miserable in. How about you? And who would you like to meet from the past?
Okay, that one of the I don't do a lot of real people in the books because it's limiting. I'd want to be, again, like you, very, very accurate, very fair. So I started out using an actual real detective whose name was John Wilson Murray. He was a real person. And I started out writing 2 plays about him, but I didn't want to go on with that because I didn't want to be unfair to him, so I went to William Murdoch. So I think part of it's not that any real person features in my books, but I certainly have admired a lot of them that I've encountered doing the research. And I got very interested in the whole period, the 1930s, with the suppression and oppression of the Communist Party and Tim Buck. So I think, I'd like to meet him. I admired him. That's a whole other story, but that's too long to go.
Is that coming in another book?
That's somewhere in one of the many books. But just the whole thing, another jump off here. Near where I live, there's an apartment building, and I found out that there was a couple there. They were called Oscar and Toby Ryan. And in the 1930s, they started a theater group, which I love the theater. And they put on a play called 8 Men Speak, which was about the attempted assassination of Tim Buck. and it was immediately closed down. They had one performance. They were not allowed to do another one because it was considered seditious. Now, we're talking 1934. That's not that long ago. And thank goodness we can still fight against that, and we must, because they had to close down. It was a play. It was a bit like poor Salman Rushdie. He'd written a book, a satirical fiction book, and he was almost killed because of that. So that's a very hot spot for writers and dramatists. And this play group did this play because they felt that through drama, through books, through music, we could reach people and, in a good way, teach them things. And I thought that was fantastic. So in terms of where would I like to live, I thought about this question. Even though it was rough and dirty and everything, I still would like to be in Elizabethan England, I think, because the ideas were so exciting. Can you imagine going to see a Shakespearean play in real? Anyway, yeah. Okay, is that it for that one?
I think so.
Okay, I have a question for you, and you can ask me too, because I want to answer it. How do you feel when you finish a book?
One of the issues is you never really finish a book any longer.
That's true.
in that you finish the draft that you're going to send the publisher. And this is, of course, draft number 123. But, you finish something, or the deadline arrives, and you send it to the publisher, but you know that it's going to come winging back with all kinds of comments, and it's not the end of the process. But when you first send the manuscript off to the publisher, it's just this enormous relief. But then it becomes more and more of a grind. As you get more and more, you get the editor, the copy editor, the researcher, everybody sort of piling in, saying, could you just change that, and do we have to, and what about, and then there are various moments which are, one hopes, hugely exciting, which is where you see the cover, and it's fantastic, except it isn't always. But then the box arrives with the finished copies, and that really is like birth, because then you can't do anything about it. And then what happens is you pick your one of the 20 books you've been sent, or actually you probably in the first batch you only get about 4 or 5 because they're first off the press, and you think, this is amazing, this is my book, I wrote this, I'm so proud of it, I love it, whatever anybody else thinks, and you open it and you discover a typo. So, and then you go on hopefully if you have a good publisher and a lot of invitations, you go on the road with it and you're talking about it. So when do you finish a book? I mean, and my, my first 2 books are about to be reissued by Penguin next year, Mrs. King and Sisters in the Wilderness. Massey Murder has just been reissued. Most of the others are in print. So I always love going to a secondhand bookshop and seeing not only which of my books is in the secondhand bookshop, but also who I dedicated it to.
The worst is to see them in those boxes that they put outside the door.
How about you? How do you feel? I have to say, Maureen sent her manuscript in yesterday, so this is a very real issue for her.
Well, when I was green and grass and just starting out, I used to finish what I was doing, and I'd literally type the end. But it does go on and on. But I did want to, because it is a relief. There is a relief, and you say, well, I can live again now, and do all the chores that have been mounting up for a long time. But okay, what's next for you then? But you'll have a Q&A after.
My major concern right now is that I am actually very concerned about the state of history in Canada. And it's not just the sort of fact that fewer and fewer people are studying history, learning history in school. Very few high schools have obligatory courses any longer. It's also that the source material is not available, that the source material, which is in the National Archives, the official government records, the National Library and Archives Canada, where it's all lodged, is so overwhelmed by the amount of material they've got. And they have no capacity to deal with digital archives, and there's going to be an avalanche within the next 10 years. That, whereas, for instance, in the US, the Clinton archives are open, and the Clinton government archives are open. In UK, the Tony Blair government archives are open. In Canada, they haven't even got to cataloguing the Kim Campbell archives, and she left office 30 years ago. So political historians in universities who want to go and do their PhDs in political history are just coming up against a brick wall. They can't get to the archives, which means there's going to be less and less political history written in this country. And I care desperately about the state of academic research in this country, because people like me and like Maureen feed off that. A person who's writing accessible history. I do actually love the title, Popular Historian Charlotte Gray. I mean, you don't need the historian, I just want popular. But we actually, we are part of a food chain that doesn't start with us. We need secondary and primary primary material, and it's not going to be available to us if we let our archives just wither and close up. So that is my main concern. So I'm writing a lot in the Globe and Mail about that at the moment.
Okay.
And I will also do another book, but at the moment it's just a proposal, and I don't want to jinx it by saying it. How about you?
I think I just sent in the book. It's in the same series of the contemporary. I call them contemporary. Nowadays it's called Ancient History, 1936. With my Charlotte Frayne person, and I didn't think I could quite face another novel, so I'm calling them connected short stories. And I stole heavily from the Canterbury Tales. They're stuck in the snowstorm. It wasn't the Canterbury. They're not on a pilgrimage, but they're stuck. So somebody says, why don't we tell each other stories? So we could all lock the doors, and then we could stay here for a few days, and we could tell each other stories. And that was fun. So there are stories, but they're all connected because they're all characters that have been in the books. And I was just going to say from earlier, it's a weird sense when you write fiction. Obviously the people that you write about really lived. And I have to remind myself that they come out of my head. So I'm thinking, gosh, I really like that person. I think I'll bring them back. It's a very strange mindset. But so that's there, and then as I was doing that as of yesterday, I thought, wow, I'd really like to continue. I'm now recovered with a story that will edge a little bit closer to World War II, and it would be involving my female protagonist and Detective William Murdoch, who is only 72. He's come back. I brought him back.
Is he still played by Yannick? Is he still played by Yannick?
I don't know yet. Poor Yannick. All those folks have been doing that for almost 20 years, so clearly they look terrific. But if you see some of in fiction time, you can just be very slow, obviously, really slow. But in real time, it's 20 years. And in fiction time, it's now 12 years, so they can look a little bit chubbier or something like that. But that's it, and it's been lovely to talk to you all, and we're going to ask you to talk in a minute.
No, we'd like to hear some questions from you.
Yes, questions, comments, because we had a lovely lunch, and I did want to introduce David Wilson and Anthony Anderson, historians. We just had dinner together, who were neighbors.
Well, first
Today
of all,
we-
before we get to the questions, that was a very enjoyable conversation, Maureen and Charlotte, so thank you very much. Maureen started the introduction, so I'll just say we have David Wilson with us and Anthony Anderson. I also neglected to name several of the CIHE board members who are here, including Martha Wilder at the back and Joanne Archibald, and I see Gordon Henderson and also Joe Martin, I think, are here, in addition to Sean and Graham. So,
Alan, can we just say, lovers of history, unite!
yes.
That's the communist thing.
So we've got about 15 or 20 minutes for questions. I'm going to ask the first one very generally, and please answer it however is appropriate for your respective ways of approaching the subject. But what makes a good story? What are the elements of a good story?
You're asking us?
Yes.
Ask Charlotte. She's got.
But it's easier for her because one element is a dead body.
That's true. A morbid imagination helps.
For me, one of the things that unites us, although we're on opposite sides of the fiction non-fiction wall, is a strong narrative. I mean, unlike academic historians who work according to a sort of different set of parameters, a historian writing accessible history has to have a narrative arc that the reader can follow, a story with a beginning, middle, and end, although it doesn't necessarily have to be told in that order, and strong characters. So for me, what I'm looking for when I'm trying to think about a book is a subject that will catch the imagination and a story that will leave a reader feeling, yes, now I understand that individual from history and I understand something about the period in which they lived. And that's why, of course, I mean, what I'm describing is a typical biography, and biography is marvelous because you have this ready-made skeleton of a story, which is birth, middle of the life, death. It's always, in fact, a little mendacious because life is never as tidy as biographers pretend it is, and it's always more complicated, and it's a subjective interpretation of a life when you're writing the biography of a real person. But I have tried to write biographies and magazine articles of really boring people, and it didn't work. So, you know, you're looking for a lively story with a lively character.
I think a couple of times this has happened to me, and I've been very humbled and honored. I was actually with a friend who had to go to the Princess Margaret Cancer Hospital, and while I was waiting for her, something came up, and this woman said to me that reading my books had got her through her treatments. And a good story transports you, whether it's for 5 minutes or an hour. And I think what I love, and I think Charlotte would agree with this, is that humanity, if you can get to that place where no matter what you're writing about, somebody understands the human part of it. And I read as a child to escape. I did. I was a lonely kid, and I got a book, and that was like, wow. It was going to another world, and for that brief period of time, you forgot to be lonely or scared or whatever you were. So if you can do that, if I can write a story that, however briefly, will transport people and make you laugh and put you to sleep, because it should be at nighttime, right?
Thank you. All right, I'm sure there's lots of questions. We'll start right here.
I have a feeling from what you said about understanding that times past were different, that you have a great deal of difficulty with people today who want to be politically correct and therefore want to diss most of our famous past heroes like Sir John A. Macdonald and so on, because they don't understand that the past was different.
It's a very, very difficult topic, and I think it could bear a lot of talking about, exactly. because some things were, as we just said, some things back there, we go, ooh, but that was that, we've got to understand that, why that was being said or done. Yeah, I think that's a good point, thank you.
I also think, though, that you have to, that history is complicated and that it's not an either-or. Either he was a hero who put the country together, or he was a wicked genocidal racist. Actually, Sir John A. Macdonald was extraordinarily successful in almost everything he did, but he also showed a remarkable lack of sympathy or understanding for that it's for the indigenous people of this country. And historians for a long time just, in fact, ignored indigenous history. And what one really wants to bring out is the fact that it's possible to be both those things. And what's great is more and more good research, more and more sort of finding out good factual information from the past that helps to build the very nuanced picture that one should be able to hold in one's mind at the same time. Right. History with a ranting history is really boring. History that's ideologically driven that's overtly ideologically driven just makes my skin crawl, as I'm sure it's true for many people. But on the other hand, we are subjects of our own period, so we bring our assumptions to history, and we should just be aware of how we're doing it.
Great, thank you. Questions over here? Any questions on this side of the room? All right, we've got 2 or 3 over here. I'll come to Jay, and I've got 2 here.
Come on this side of the room. They can't have all the questions.
Roundheads, royalists.
Charlotte, my book club is reviewing your book on Tuesday. So I wanted to refresh my memory, and I decided to listen to the audio version. How do you choose, or do you get to choose the reader?
So you're talking about Passionate Mothers, Powerful Sons.
I'm talking about the Massey murder.
Oh, the Massey murder. I had nothing to do with choosing the reader. I wasn't given any choice on that. And I've heard it's fine. I heard it's a good book.
Except for
Oh, I can't. You should hear what they did with the indigenous names of West Coast tribes when they did the Gold Diggers. But my worst experience actually was with Passionate Mothers, Powerful Sons, which was being done out of New York, the audio version. And they sent me 4 potential actors reading it. One came from the Deep South. One had such an incredibly grand accent, grand English accent, that it would put anybody's backs up, and you couldn't possibly have her doing American women. One was just sort of straight New York, Brooklyn. And, I mean, the accents were just horrendous. And I kept saying, no, you've got to find a mid-Atlantic accent. And I think on Voice 12 we agreed that it was all right. But to find a narrator for a book where you know that the subjects would have had very different accents, it was very hard. But generally, actually, I have not had the choice of who does the audio books. And I've never been asked to read one myself, and I've always regretted that, but I think I'm probably too English for American audiences or North American audiences.
All right, we have a question here from Margaret.
Good for you. I praised him because I'm an identical twin, and he got the right one. This is a question from Maureen, and she may not realize that she has a connection with this church, and that is one of the guest stars of the Murdoch Mysteries in an episode was a man who was beloved in Toronto, very well-known man, and a loved member of our church, and that's David Onley.
Oh, yes.
And so,
right.
Can you explain a little bit about how that came to be?
Oh, I was thinking about that before we started, because David was a passionate Murdoch fan. And we met on the set, actually, when he had a cameo. I forget who he played, Oliver Mowat, I think it was. Yeah, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. And we made friends with him and Ruth Ann, and we'd meet periodically for dinner. And he always wanted to tell me the latest story that he knew would make a good episode. And we'd go, yeah, people do that a lot. And I'm not saying, please, I'm happy to talk to you, but it's amazing. And they're good. I can not do anything about it. I have no say in the story choice. But people will write to me, and it's often historically true. That, you probably wrote to me about the Massey murder, and I didn't know. So, anyway.
So how did David only get a walk-on part in?
He was lieutenant governor at the time.
No, but how did they even put him on?
Oh, because they were filming in Queen's Park, and they asked him if he'd like to do a cameo, and as you know, he was dreadfully disabled from polio, and he managed to stand up, so you wouldn't have known. And I just loved him, and I was very, very sad when he passed away. And he had the funeral here, of course. But he just loved Murdoch. It was just wonderful. And I swear, I still remember some of the stories he'd tell me, and I hope one day we'll get them on there and say, David, look, this is your story.
All right, thank you. We have a question here from Jay.
I'm wondering what both of your thoughts are about autobiographies where the author is not entirely truthful about certain material facts. And I have a specific example in mind. A number of years ago, there was an excellent documentary about the life of Steven Spielberg. And then a few years ago, he decided to make a dramatization of his formative years that was very faithful to his own life in many ways, including the way people dressed, things that happened, the characters in it. But there was one critical difference, which is that he had a falling out with his father, and they didn't speak to each other for about 20 years. And the film would have you believe that never happened. When I first saw that, something rubbed me the wrong way about it, and I thought, that isn't right. And then I thought, well, he's the person who's making this film. If he wants to reimagine it the way he wishes things had unfolded, that's his prerogative. But what are your thoughts about that?
Memoir, there's a huge difference between memoir and biography. In any kind of biography, the biographer must try very hard for as much objectivity as possible. It's impossible to be completely objective, but you have to try and be balanced, and you have to try and stick to the facts. Memoir, it's your story. And it's amazing to me how often people write memoirs, and even their close siblings say, that's not how it happened.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own sort of view of life. And you can put whatever frame you want on it. I mean, I remember very vividly in my own life the way I thought about some of my experiences when I was in my teens. And then I discovered feminism, and I ran them through a completely different lens. And part of that was thinking not, oh my God, I was so stupid, this is so embarrassing. And thinking, I did really well, I stood up to him. He was a jerk. It didn't have to be a he, but it often was. Sort of that you shift your perspective. Well, when somebody's writing a memoir, often, they're at a stage in their life where they've evolved through several different ways of putting it their life, deciding what was important in their life, and they're looking at it all in retrospect anyway. And they've decided what's important and what is the story they want to tell, which may not necessarily, regardless of the facts, it may not necessarily be the same story as anyone else thinks they should tell.
A very dear friend of mine was writing a memoir about a beloved grandmother, and he showed it to her, and he was a bit nervous about what she was going to say. And she said, "I never had a yellow dress." So I think it's a very, very interesting question, may I say, because we tend to believe it, right? If, we're writing a biography, we believe it. We absolutely believe it. But if I don't know. I think it's important to make it clear, as Charlotte said, this is my story. I'm not necessarily trying to make it an accurate picture. Or you're trying to make it as accurate as possible.
We've got time for one more question. Anybody? All right, in the back here from Joanne.
Hello, that was an amazing conversation. I'm a historian as well, so I really appreciate you guys bringing to life the archival material. It's wonderful. And thank you, Charlotte, for all of your writing on the state of affairs at Library and Archives. That's a huge issue, and public support and awareness for that is going to be really and critically important to making some changes. My question is about publishers. If you were to advise a young Canadian woman who wanted to do some writing and had some writing in her computer, which publishers have you worked with that you really enjoyed, and are there any that you would avoid?
Thank you. Great question.
So you're talking fiction or non-fiction?
She's
Non-fiction.
She just wants me to answer that.
It's really tough, I'm afraid. I don't think I have a good news story here for you. And also, what you really need to do is, if you can, don't start thinking, I'm going to send my manuscript to Simon & Schuster, just out of the blue. There are lots of steps you should take first. That you should try and get stuff published, shorter articles in newspapers and magazines, so you establish your byline. You need to get an agent who will look at your work and midwife it into the publisher's hands. You don't need to... I don't know how many times people have said to Maureen, "Do you know what J.K. Rowling has made out of her books? Boy, you guys get well paid." There is one J.K. Rowling in this world, and there are 100 million people who think they can write a book. So it's now, and in Canada it's particularly difficult because Canadians will read British history as well as Canadian history, American history as well as Canadian history, Australian history as well as Canadian history. Only Canadians will read Canadian history. And it's a very small market. And frankly, what I now say to people is when they want to be writers, not necessarily about history or anything else, I say, have you ever thought about script writing? Because that's where the eyeballs are going these days. And historical documentaries are, I think, a fascinating and challenging genre, which if I was starting writing now, I'd take a very serious look at them.
I should just tell you quickly my experience. Yesterday I was reading a new book by Sebastian Faulks, his memoir actually, and he talked about sending, we call it cold submission, to a publisher, and the publisher actually read it and said they'd take it. This is almost unheard of. And I don't, see, my experience was, okay, I was at a conference. I think the human contact is very, very important.
Absolutely.
We're people, so I was very lucky to have a very dear friend, Eric Wright, who wrote Mysteries. We were at a conference together, we were at dinner, and he very subtly maneuvered it so that I was sitting beside his editor. And we hit it off. I loved her, Ruth Cavan, and we hit it off. I became a face to a manuscript. And that can make a big difference. Still have got a good manuscript. She said something like, "Oh, Eric tells me you've written a mystery novel." And I said, "Yes, it's on your desk right now." And she said, "I'll look at it when I get back." And that's how it started. So it's really important to be immersed in it. Sorry to sound a bit on a soapbox, but I get a bit aggravated where people don't do their homework.
I think that's right.
And I'm doing your homework, if you, whatever you're going to go in. For me, it was going to mystery conferences, reading every book I could think of that resonated with me. You can't copy. Don't ever think you can copy. And then getting in that world, and you become a person. And sooner or later, you're going to meet another person who will say, I like that story. I like that manuscript. And then you'll be famous, and you'll be very wealthy.
And you'll have a car where the number plate is Murdoch.
That's true.
All right, that's great. So a couple of quick announcements. There will be refreshments, and there is a book table where you can buy copies of both Maureen and Charlotte's books. It was pointed out to me that one thing that these two ladies have in common is that Charlotte, some years ago, was named to the Order of Canada. And just in the past year, Maureen was also named to the Order of Canada.
Sorry, we were just going to say we both have our snowflakes on, and we're just trying to work out the secret handshake. We haven't got it yet.
That's great. So please stick around for conversation and to have books bought and signed. And before we go, though, I would like to call upon one of the directors of the Canadian Institute for Historical Education, Sean Conway, to offer a word of thanks to our two speakers tonight.
Thank you very much, Alan, Maureen, Charlotte. Listen, you two know how to draw a crowd. Thank you both so much for an enlivening and very stimulating evening.